Hello. Feels like a long time since I made one of these videos. Any sort of video. It's been about 2 weeks. Just because I've been really busy with work and life. But over the last few weeks, I've been reading this book, which is actually the second time I've read it. I've read it before. The first time I read it was during the first COVID lockdown in 2020. But I didn't I'm not sure if I didn't finish it or something, or I skipped a part. So I was meaning to go back and read it again, and so I did. I won't stay there. And as it says there, it is a Faith No More band biography. Small Victories: The True Story of Faith No More by Adrian Hart. And the reason why this is quite a good book is that it features, or is together with, Billy Gould, Roddy Bottum, and Mike Borden. It's not one of those ones that's completely unauthorized where they have no access to the band and it's all kind of done by interviews from the past and kind of side characters. These are three of the three original members, the core of the band. And so therefore some really great insight. In saying that, it would have been, you can always say, how could it be better? If they had access to, obviously, Mike Patton or even Chuck Mosley and Jim Martin. And they had access also to John Hudson, the most recent guitarist, and Trey Spruance, a little bit. That he didn't feature in the book that much, but obviously was a guitarist for a short time. And Dean Menter, I think they had access to him. As in, those guys actually talk to the author when I say they had access. So, a lot of the guys in the band. Also, producer Matt Wallace, who produced a lot of those early albums. It's you get the inside scoop, I guess. It feels accurate, and the author goes into good detail. It's a good mixture of interband relationship stuff, as well as studio stuff and how songs were written. It really covers everything without going too much in one direction. So it's a really well balanced and weighted book in that way. If you're a fan of Faith No More at all, although, I'd say you have to be a pretty decent, a big fan. If you just like a few of their songs, then it probably wouldn't be that interesting for you. But I've always been, since what age? I don't know, about 15 or something, I've been a pretty huge fan. I'd say since about 16, they've always been consistently one of my favorite bands. And till this day, they still are. So I was going to go through and look at some of the CDs I have of theirs. However, they unfortunately are one of the bands where I've owned all of their albums, except for Sol Invictus, all of their albums over my life at one stage or another. But currently, all the ones I have are without cases. They're the ones that I kept the disc and threw away the jewel case and the artwork for many of them. But we'll go through and see what I have anyway. And maybe as I go through, I'll talk about a bit of the stuff that kind of came up in the book. So these are all in that, I've shown this folder before. It's a big kind of multi-page binder with lots of loose CDs. But we'll go I guess actually the first one, I've shown this before. I've done a video about this. I got this secondhand a few years ago. Introduce Yourself, which was the album they did pre-Mike Patton, their second album. Their first album was We Care a Lot. I don't have that at this time, but I did own that many years ago. This is actually quite a good album. As much as I think Mike Patton is a far superior vocalist, lyricist, frontman than Chuck Mosley ever was, there's still really good songs on this. Would it have been better if Patton was the singer? Well, quite possibly. But I guess he kind of he has his own, obviously his own style and his own kind of take on the songs. Chuck Mosley I'm talking about, but it is a bit kind of just shouty and chanting almost, a lot of it. It's not necessarily singing for the most part. But obviously, Introduce Yourself, the song itself is quite a well-known song. They play that at shows from time to time. Chinese Arithmetic, I've always loved that song. We Care a Lot, that's the, if you hear, it's funny, I was listening to that recently, the original version they did on the We Care a Lot album, and then you compare it to the one that they put on this album, the kind of updated version. The original version sounds so small sonically. It sounds like a really like I don't know if it's the production of it or what, but it just sounds like a really small sounding song without a lot of oomph or power behind it. And then they did this updated version, and it a lot better. So then we move on to they kicked Chuck Mosley out of the band, and there's quite a lot of that. He was there was tension in the band between him and the other members, and he had addiction problems. And not just that, he didn't necessarily seem that happy in the band, and the band didn't seem that happy with him. But then after he left, they were kind of on the way up. They had obviously had a deal with Warner Brothers through Slash. Slash is the Warner Brothers imprint, I believe. And so after Introduce Yourself, like they were kind of like seen as like an ascendant band. Their star was on the rise. And their next album was kind of going to be their breakthrough. And at this time as well, because this was put out in what, 87. Those are the late 80s, early 90s, obviously, with that time where things were kind of, music was changing, and there was kind of this more emerging alternative rock, metal at the same time as kind of, but running parallel to like the mainstream hair metal type stuff or glam rock type stuff. And so anyway, Faith No More were kind of seen as a band to kind of keep an eye on. And so they looked around for a vocalist. And earlier they had been given a demo tape of Mr. Bungle when they were touring up in Northern California. I think they gave it to the drummer, Mike Borden, Puffy, I think. Anyway, they maybe they give it to him and Jim Martin, because there's a bit in the book about that, how they were both listening to the demos of Mr. Bungle and commenting on the different styles. So you can probably tell my voice, I don't have a lot of energy today. Anyway, they approached Mike Patton, and to be honest, he wasn't, from the book, the way it's written in the book, he wasn't like he was a kid. He was like quite a bit younger than the other members of the band. He was living up in Eureka, California. His band, Mr. Bungle, were nothing. They were just like, any other local nothing band in any town in America. It's not as though they were like being courted by major labels or anything. I don't even know if they'd toured outside of Northern California. And so it's not as though he had anything going on. And so when they rang him or contacted him, kind of put it to him, like, come down and try out for the band, or, maybe they'd be interested in having him in the band. He wasn't like, oh yeah, like he was just kind of like, oh, okay, I guess so. Like his attitude kind of pissed them off a little bit. They were maybe expecting a bit more like appreciation and gratitude that he was being given this opportunity. And that kind of really colored the relationship between the band and Mike Patton throughout their whole career, or whatever, the next, however long they lasted, about 9 to 10 years. There was always a lot of kind of again, there were tension. I guess the band Faith No More kind of thrived on tension. And a lot of the book kind of talks about that tension, the tension between different members, the tension between Jim Martin and the rest of the band, between Mike Patton and the rest of the band, between the band and the audience, between the band and the label, the band and the media. There's kind of tension all over the place. And but it always seemed Mike Patton, maybe some members of the band thought that he perceived himself as too good for them. And I kind of understand that. I could kind of get that feeling as well from some of his interviews that he did while they were still going and then after. Anyway, I'm going to use too much time here. So first one that I've got, Sans Case and Artwork, is Faith No More, The Real Thing. Their breakthrough album and their biggest album commercially. And I think it's a classic album. It's kind of doesn't have a bad song on it. Falling to Pieces and Surprise, those kind of, Surprise You're Dead and Falling to Pieces I've kind of never been huge on. But in saying that, listening to Falling to Pieces a bit more recently, and I kind of appreciate it a bit more than I did. But it's actually kind of funny that Billy Gould and was it Roddy? Definitely Billy Gould talked about how he didn't like that song. He's quite kind of open about, I didn't like that song. I've never liked that song. He says that about a few songs throughout the band's career. From Out of Nowhere, I love that song. I mean, the first time I heard that when I was a teenager, it's got so much energy. It's kind of like, it like pumps you up. Epic, obviously, that was the first song of theirs I ever heard, which is probably the same for most people. Zombie Eaters and The Real Thing, I kind of put those two songs together, even though they're different, but they kind of have a similar kind of feeling, kind of darkness, really show off Patton's vocals. Underwater Love, a bit more, how would you call it? I could almost see it kind of being like a radio hit, that song. Not that it ever was. I don't think they released it as a single, but Morning After, Woodpecker from Mars, which is a instrumental. War Pigs, which is the Black Sabbath cover, and I think, maybe sacrilege to say, but I think better than the original. Like, I think Mike Patton is obviously, not saying Ozzy is a bad vocalist. Ozzy is Ozzy. He's kind of one of the most recognizable, unique voices in rock music. But I'd say Mike Patton obviously has got a lot more range and power in his voice. And obviously, those early Sabbath recordings are quite dated. You know, they're recorded in the late 60s, early 70s, and they kind of sound like that. And I'm sure they've been remastered or whatnot plenty of times, but they never seem to have the same power as Led Zeppelin's stuff. Led Zeppelin always sound massive on the stereo. But Black Sabbath always kind of have a certain, and maybe this is the appeal of it, it's kind of this certain like earthiness or woodiness to their sound, which gives it definitely gives it a vibe, but also kind of, I feel, limits its sonic width, if that is anything, if that means anything to anyone. So when you hear it from a band being recorded in 1989, and with such a fucking amazing, you know, the Black Sabbath rhythm section's amazing as well, Geezer Butler in particular, but Billy Gould and Mike Borden are such an underrated rhythm section, in my opinion. They're like the backbone of the band, more than, you know, I guess the rhythm section is the backbone of any band, but even more so, the drums and the bass in Faith No More are, more than any band of this era, more important than the guitar. The guitar is kind of like a side thing, and that's something that they talk about in the book a lot as well, that more different than any other kind of metal or alternative rock band at that time. the keyboard, the drums, and the bass were the foundation and the focus of Faith No More's music. And the the guitar worked almost in a way that a keyboard would work in other bands. It kind of was like adding atmospherics and around the edges. And that's especially after Jim Martin left. Now, that's not entirely true for every song. Of course, there are songs where there's just straight ahead guitar songs like Dig in the Grave or Gentle Art of Making Enemies or things like that, or some other things. But yeah. And so therefore hearing those two guys in the recording of War Pigs is just massive. So yeah, this came out in 89. Reading about this, that, you know, they were helped a lot by Guns N' Roses. Well, actually, yeah. Actually, I guess that's debatable, actually, because they talk about that. They show like how they went on these big tours of Guns N' Roses, toured all around the world, and then like their album sales weren't really moving. It kind of happened a little bit after, but I'd say it definitely did help in some way. They went on these tours with Guns N' Roses and Metallica, opening for them, and I'm trying to think how I can put this without putting it down like this. And yeah, it was kind of like they were playing stadium shows and stuff like this. And for Mike Patton, that's, you know, like I said, going from Eureka, California to playing at best bars to opening for Metallica and Guns N' Roses in literally stadium shows in Europe and America is a big step. But he handled it pretty well, I reckon. Like they talk about that again, that tension, that he was a bit of a brat sometimes, and he was young as well. He was like, I can't remember how young he was, but he was early 20s at most. And it kind of slowly picked up steam, the album, and then kind of after they'd done all these tours, they kind of, there's chapters, and it just seems like they're touring constantly, touring, and then slowly the album starting to make inroads, both in the UK and the US, and Epic is picked up by MTV, which really is, that's the thing that, it's amazing how much MTV, what impact they had on bands in this era. They could, I would say make or break, because they're not really breaking the band, but they could certainly make a band. They had this different, like, I can't remember the name they used, but there's a different kind of rotation system, and if you're in an A rotation or B rotation or C rotation, and if you get into A rotation, it's something like guaranteed to be paid every hour, every day, or something like, maybe even more than that, like 3 times an hour per day or something stupid. It's not that, but I can't remember. There's some statistic that it's played multiple times every day over a kind of weeks or months period. And it's like you're just hammering it into the brains of the viewing public. And if it's a song like Epic, which is, whatever you feel about that song, it's a pretty catchy song. It's very kind of hooky, you know. And you can imagine how much that would have just, if people heard it, how it would catch on very easily. And so they got to the end of that cycle, and as so many bands have gone through like those tours and being exposed to you know, fame and all the rest of it, especially something like being with Guns N' Roses, the biggest band in the world at this time, and kind of the very, what do you call it, the picture perfect, the dictionary definition of rock star excess, and you know, all that, you know, you've heard the stories of Guns N' Roses in that day, you know, coming on stage 3 hours late and having these massive backstage parties with, you know, ridiculous tour riders and Axl Rose touring with like a psychic and a fortune teller and all the rest of it. So they kind of bucked against that and rebelled against that. And there was kind of like interviews during that time. They would almost like shit talking Guns N' Roses constantly. And there's a part in the book where Axl and Slash confront them. And as much as Axl is kind of painted as a prima donna and a diva, and he is, if even half of the stories are true about him, but they called the band into the dressing room after one of the shows, Axl and Slash, and said, like, what the fuck? Why are you guys saying these things about us? And like Billy Gould and I can't remember who else. I think it was Billy and Mike Patton were in there, and they're like, yeah, like two school kids in the principal's office, like looking at the ground with their hands in their pockets. But they both said, you know, to their credit, to Slash and Axl's credit, they were actually pretty cool about it. They're like, you know, we understand that might, you know, this and that might be not easy, and this is not a, but you know, you can't be talking shit about us. That's not fair. And and in the end, they kind of you know, said, you know, let's not do that anymore. I hope everything's cool. If you have any problems, talk to us. Which I've heard other, you know, there's stories of bands being kicked off tours lots of times, much worse, much lesser things than that. Anyway, they went into the studio for Angel Dust, which is their second album with Patton, released in '93. Is it '93? See it early. Is it, I think it was '92, but let's say '92, '93. I'm not exactly sure. I actually had the double disc of Angel Dust. I'm going to be running out of space here. Which includes, I'll put this one up here. This live CD with 4 tracks. Faith No More, Free Concert in the Park. All tracks recorded live in Munich on the 9th of November 1992. So we've got Easy, Live, Be Aggressive, Kindergarten, and Mark Bowen. Live edition. Let's put out on Liberation. Sorry, my hand's covering that, isn't it? Okay, so I guess Liberation is another imprint, because you've got Slash and Liberation there. I can't actually remember anything about them talking about Liberation, but maybe it's in a specific country. They had another record label. During the work on this album, that's where the relationship with Jim Martin really kind of soured, because there would always been, like I said, there had always been tension and kind of the separation, and the people have been talking about that. It was that duality of the different kind, you know, of Jim Martin's metal input is what made the real thing so great, kind of put together with the more alternative side of the other guys. But during the writing process of this album, his father died, Jim Martin's father died, and so he didn't spend a lot of time in the studio, and they tried, from what the band said, they really tried to make it work. They moved the sessions, or at least the rehearsal sessions, out to the East Bay, near where he lived, kind of not in San Francisco proper, out towards, I guess, in Oakland. And at the same time, Mike Patton was a little bit absent, because he was touring, maybe recording and touring the first Mr. Bungle album, the self-titled Mr. Bungle album, the one with the clown on the front. So it was really more the other guys, but he did come into the studios, because I've seen footage of him, and they'd actually talk about that, of him writing Malpractice, doing that guitar riff. The album, obviously, if you know Angel Dust, it's quite a different album than The Real Thing. If you had only ever heard The Real Thing before, you would expect, and someone said, well, how would you imagine the album coming after this? You would have a certain idea in your head. But I'm not going to go and kind of over exaggerate and say it's completely different. It's a complete revolution. It's not. It's the same band. It's the same members playing basically the same genre of music, but it is a lot darker and more dissonant. And I just think, for me, I've always, when I imagine this album, I imagine the blue and black, like the color scheme of the front cover. It's got that kind of the swan with a beautiful light blue. Then at the top of this one, more like a dark, very dark black blue. And that's how I imagine the sonic sound of the album as well. It's very kind of dark blue, black, chaotic, schizophrenic kind of sound. especially a song like Caffeine, or like I said, Malpractice, or Jizz Lobber, or Crack Hitler. These songs really kind of have this kind of like claustrophobic darkness to them. Midlife Crisis was, I think, the first single, which I've always loved that song. Even now, it's like it's kind of like when it's so funny when you hear like that they said in the book that that's the song where they all work together on it and everyone's got a writing credit on that song. And sometimes it's funny when the band, you can tell when everyone's worked on something, like it kind of feels like it's the synthesis of all the sounds of the members coming together. And that's kind of how I felt with Midlife Crisis. RV, which is that kind of piano country type twangy song, which I've always liked that as well. They do that cover of Midnight Cowboy from the soundtrack. I guess I can talk about this time, is that when I saw them, the first time I saw them in concert was in 1997. They were touring Album of the Year, and I was 16 years old, and they came on stage, and the first thing they played was Midnight Cowboy, and Mike Patton was using the mouth mellotron thing, mouth, it's like it's got that tube and you hold the keyboard and kind of play it. And that show, it's kind of, I was just thinking about this last night. This is going to be a long video because it's 26 minutes. I'm running up to Angel Dust. Just in Auckland here, we have now a summer festival. Like, they have music festivals in the summertime. It's summer here now. And after Christmas, they start having some music festivals. And one of the ones they have is called Laneway Festival, which I think was originally from Australia. And it's the kind of music that I don't really know or like. It's kind of aimed at young people, I guess early 20s. There's usually one band I've heard of and kind of like, but usually it's a bunch of bands I've never heard of. I think like last year that the headline was Charlie XC or something like that. Charlie NXC or something. So anyway, it's this festival's here, and just yesterday was a news story that they're going to make it at R18. 16 and 17-year-olds aren't allowed to go because the liquor license, you can buy alcohol on site, and because the city council is not satisfied with the setup that the promoters have put in place, they think young people might be able to buy alcohol. And so therefore they're just going to say, okay, no 16, 17-year-olds, you have to be 18. And I was thinking, fuck. When I was 16 or 17, 15, 16, 17, kind of my most fun, exciting memories I have of concerts are of that age. Because when you're that age, when you're those teenage years, 15, 16, 17, you can enjoy things in a different way than when you're an adult. When you're an adult, you can enjoy things, obviously, and have fun and all the rest of it, but it's not in the same way as when you're a teenager. When you're a teenager, you're an idiot. Everyone is. That part of your brain is not developed. So therefore you are able to have fun with abandon in a way that you can't do when you're an adult. You can jump around and fucking slam dance and mosh and all the rest of it. You don't care what other people think, or maybe you do, but it's kind of in a different way, and it's just, you experience things in a different way. And so taking that away from kids, 16, 17-year-olds, that really kind of pissed me off reading that. Like, people don't realize how important those things are, how like formative, and like they like go into make a part of you. I don't know if I'm explaining this properly. Going to that Faith No More concert when I was 16, still now as a 43-year-old man, I still have such vivid, clear memories of the feeling and the excitement and the happiness and just how much I loved that concert. It makes me feel like emotional talking about it, how much I loved it. How much fun I had, jumping around and And so the idea of kids not being able to do that nowadays is fucked up. And it's just stupid. Like, what? Take away the alcohol then. So the alcohol takes primacy over the someone, a whole demographic of audience not being able to attend. It's like kids, that generation, like, I know, like, it's easy to kind of rant on that. Oh, kids nowadays and this and that. I don't know enough about that age group because I don't really know anywhere. My nephew, but he's a little older than that. My kid's much younger than that. Eventually my kid will get to that age group. But the things you hear about kids nowadays is that there's a lot more mental illness, anxiety and depression. They're a lot more isolated and hard to develop social bonds. They're a lot just more, everything's atomized and disconnected. And we take away more and more. How can you expect them to form any of these things if whatever opportunities that might present themselves are taken away? It bums me out because that kind of thing can't lead anywhere good. Denying kids those kinds of formative life experiences. Maybe that doesn't seem important to people going to a concert. It's just like, but it feels like it was important to me. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe I'm over exaggerating in my memory, which is a possibility. But it was so, like I said, so vivid in my memory. Like I feel so appreciative. I don't know who, I bought the ticket myself, but appreciative to the band. The band toured here. That I could experience, I had the chance to experience that at that age. It was so fun. Anyway, I kind of feel way off. What's the Angel Dust? Basically, Jim Martin didn't like the music. He called it gay disco. They kind of repeat that again and again in the book. It sounds like gay disco to him. Not just that, he's given an interview more recently, not recently, I think it was 2015, to a website saying that he feels it was contrived, the record label was too much involved, they were affected by the media, like interviews where they were sniping at each other and other bits. They needed to communicate better, which definitely sounds true. Watching live footage from that era, I felt sorry for Jim. He almost felt like the others were bullying him, especially Patton was kind of bullying him. But then reading the book, he was kind of a dick. He was kind of a baby. Like, they tried to make it easier. They had a lunch together with him and said, whatever problem you have, let's sort it out. And if we want to make this work. And he basically kind of threw a tantrum, like, I'm insulted that you've decided to ask me this or something like this, which sounded silly. He sounded like he was trapped in his own image of himself, of the image of, what is it, big sick Jim. Is that what it is? Big ugly sick Jim. The kind of the metal guy of the band with the beard and the long hair and the glasses and the denim vest and all the rest of it, flying V guitar. And he was kind of, it's kind of funny. He was really great friends with James Hetfield. Maybe still is, probably still is. And it sounds like kind of Hetfield at that time, kind of a prisoner to his own image. Couldn't kind of show any true emotion or show any kind of weakness because he's the almighty Hetfield, which is, we know what that, some kind of monster documentary is about, him kind of trying to escape that. It sounds like that Jim was kind of a prisoner to that of himself, and therefore that manifested itself in him being a dick to everyone. And in fairness, the others being a dick to him too. Because like I said, I felt sorry for him watching some of the very late touring footage of this cycle where they were playing some of the festivals in Europe around 1993. And it just really felt like they were kind of, at least Patton was kind of almost bullying him on stage. like throwing shit at him. Yeah, anyway, long story short, they fired him by fax, famously, after this album for many reasons, but basically all those things that I just said. He didn't seem like he was into the music. He was talking shit. He was making everything tense. And yeah, fast forward, pretty soon after that, they went into the studio, or they started writing for King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime. Angel Dust did nowhere near as well as the real thing commercially, at least in America. It actually did very well overseas, in Europe and Australia and New Zealand and South America. But in America, it was almost like they'd poisoned the market in America because of some things they had done to do with radio station promotions, and I guess also just the sound change of the new album, that just they kind of lost their chance in America. Anyway, they decided to work with Andy Wallace, usually known as a mixer, but here producing. Obviously, he's produced other albums as well, lots of other albums, but usually we think of him mixing albums. And they recruited Trey Spruance from Mr. Bungle, Mike Patton's childhood friend. And interestingly, which probably speaks a lot to the relationships in that band, Mike Patton kind of didn't want him in Faith No More. He was against it. And he kind of talked shit on him to the others, like saying he was a rich kid and a spoiled brat and it wouldn't work and he would cause problems. This album, I love this album as well. It didn't seem to be very critically well received. It's not as dark as Angel Dust. It's still a kind of like a heavy album with again those things I mentioned, like a dissonance and all the rest of it, but it's doesn't feel as dark as Angel Dust for whatever reason. You got songs like Star AD and Evidence, and sorry, I can't pronounce the Portuguese one, Carrado Valahal, whatever it is. And then Take This Bottle and Last to Know. These songs are much more on the lighter side of the aural spectrum and even the atmospheric spectrum. It just doesn't feel as dark. I associate this a lot with my kind of mid-teens. This came out in 95, so I would have been at 14 when this came out. And 14, 15, this album kind of, I have a lot of memories of it. Trey Spruance recorded it with them, wrote some of the stuff with them, did a lot of the kind of orchestral scoring for songs that needed it, because he's kind of like a musical genius. But when it came to time to kind of tour the album, he didn't want to do it. And I'd always heard it was because he left the band because he didn't want to tour. He didn't want to commit to this huge world tour. But it comes out that actually that wasn't the reason. It was because they wouldn't let him off as a salaried member. He was basically just a salaried member. He wanted something more permanent or better paying. And they, at least the management, wouldn't do that. Wouldn't agree to that. And so he said, if that, I'm not doing it. And he walked away from it. And they instead, for the tour, went with Dean Menter, who was Roddy's keyboard tech. He toured the album with them. Yeah, I'm trying to think what else to say about. I'm trying to think what was the big single. There wasn't really a big, like Digging a Grave was a single, Ricochet was a single, but they really didn't do much of anything, did they? Both great songs, but I'm talking commercially. Evidence probably was the biggest commercial success on this album, which again kind of like Easy on the Angel Dust kind of showed that side of them more. Roddy was also largely absent from this, which is something I heard before. It's kind of like been something I've heard over the years, that there's not a lot of keyboards on this album. It's a lot more guitar focused. Some of the songs got no keyboards. Like, does Dig in a Grave? Maybe has a little bit of keyboards in the breakdown part, in the bridge. But I don't think it does, actually. He was overcoming heroin addiction, and he was also focusing, after that he took care of the heroin addiction, he was focusing on his side project, Imperial Teen, which he would say wasn't a side project, it was his main focus. And also a lot of his friends, I think also father, died. And they talk about kind of the double standard, that if Jim Martin had a similar thing, his father died and he wasn't really present for it, and he didn't add a lot to Angel Dust, and so therefore, they added to his firing, but they were a lot more lenient with Roddy, that I guess maybe because he was like a founding member, I don't know. And then we come to this album here, Album of the Year, released in 1997, 2 years later, which is the final album of the original run, let's say, of the band. I love this album as well. I've said this about every album so far, haven't I? But it's, again, it's like so many memories of this album around that time. I remember buying it, working in a supermarket at the time and buying it with my own money. It's a great album, great songs. Collision, Strip Search, which is one of my favorite songs that they've ever done, which incidentally was mainly written by John Hudson, who was the new guitarist. So I didn't say Dean Menter didn't work out. They couldn't really write with him. He didn't gel. And so they got John Hudson, who was a friend of Billy's, I think. And he wrote Strip Search. And also I think he wrote Collision and some other bits and pieces. So he kind of immediately came in and was contributing a lot to the band. And it's kind of, that's what Billy or maybe Roddy said, that song Strip Search, it was the first time they had someone come in who could write a Faith No More song without being told how to do it. Because obviously a Faith No More song, like that's what John would say. He would go home at night and write, like Billy would give him like a 4-track demo recording of something and tell him to kind of work on it, add something to it. And he would put something on it and he would think, oh, this is amazing, they're going to love this. And he'd give it back to Billy and Billy would be like, doesn't really sound like Faith No More. And it's kind of true, isn't it? A band's got their own sound, and just because something's sounds like a great song, it's not necessarily something that they want to record or release because it's just not them. But they all felt that with Strip Search, it was a Faith No More song. And that's why I was kind of surprised that he was the writer of it, because it really does sound like it captures kind of the essence of that part of them. Because they're not just that kind of sound, obviously, but that certainly is one of their sounds. Last Cup of Sorrow, great song. Ashes to Ashes, brilliant song. Naked in Front of the Computer, one of my favorite songs of theirs that really isn't kind of talked about a lot is Helpless. Quite a simple song, but it's I especially like Patton's vocal and his lyrics in that song. So yeah, a great album. Like I said, this is when I saw them on tour. They toured here. It would have been late 1997, and they broke up in early 98. So what are we at? 6 months before they broke up, they toured here. So very happy that I could see them in that original kind of incarnation. Obviously not the original incarnation, I guess would be with Jim, but I would be too young. They did tour in 91, but I would have been like 9 years old. So as far as other stuff I have of theirs, I've got what have I got? Oh, I've got this. I've got a very best, sorry, I'm covering onto the very best definitive ultimate greatest hits collection, CD1, and CD2 of that, which I actually have the artwork for, is a B-sides. B-sides and rarities. This has got, for example, like Absolute Zero, and actually it'll be in here. I luckily have the booklet. That was, I think, featured in Album of the Year, that picture. Absolute Zero, The Big Kahuna. Yeah. To be honest, none of those songs are really that great. There are other better B-sides that they've done. I like their live version of This Guy's in Love with You, the Backrack song. They did that in Auckland when they toured here in '97, I remember. And so there is the cover of all the albums I've just shown you. Introduce Yourself, The Real Thing, Angel Dust, King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime, Album of the Year. This one here, speaking of B-sides and rarities, is something my friend, well, actually wasn't, I guess, yeah, friend, ex-co-worker. He was a huge Mike Patton fan, even bigger than me. And I'm a pretty huge, well, I was. I guess it's kind of dialed back a little bit over the years, but I was a huge Mike Patton fan. This is there's a bunch of random stuff from Mike Patton, like things like guest spots he did at like Handsome Boy Modeling School, and The Executioners, and Team Sleep. You know, he's done like guests with different artists over the years, and he put together on the CD for me, I remember. I haven't listened to that for a long time though. So yeah, that's a look at what I have in terms of Faith No More CDs. Now, I know it's not that great showing them without jewel cases. Trust me, I wish I had them all still with the jewel cases and the booklets, but like an idiot, about 15 years ago, would have been, yeah, 15, no, yeah, 15, it actually was about 15 years ago. Kind of through necessity, I really had no choice. If I couldn't do that, I would have had to just leave them where they were, and they would have been thrown out anyway. So I decided to throw away all the excess plastic and buy this and just keep them. So at least I still had the music. But obviously then 15 years later, I'm like, oh, I wish I didn't do that. But like I said, I really had no choice. There wasn't any other option at that time. I was in between houses and having to keep my crap in different places, and it was a bloody nightmare. So yeah, that's Faith No More. I saw them for a second time live after they had their reunion. I saw them in 2010 at the Spark Arena, and again, a brilliant show. But just like I said, when in 2010 I was like, you know, almost 30, and I experienced the show in a very different way than I did when I was 16. I enjoyed it. I liked it. I'm happy I went. But it's not the same. The kind of music that, especially that kind of visceral rock music, metal, it really is the music of youth in that live setting. Because there's music that's more kind of dialed back and I don't know what you call it, like chilled out or lower energy. As an older person, I appreciate that in a different way. Because when I was younger, I couldn't even listen to some of that kind of stuff, you know, like jazz, for example, or some electronic music. But now, like I'm older, I can sit there and like in a live venue and like be seated and really kind of experience it and like enjoy it in that way. But for something that's kind of a full energy, full on rock show or metal show, that is something that's like designed for young people, in my opinion. So yeah, how many years is that? Let's say if I really started being a fan of theirs, I'd say, let's say 95. It's 95. So it's almost 30 years, 29, 30 years next year. I've been not just a fan, like I talk about other bands, and I talk about, say, this is one of those bands that has been present from from when I first started liking them, there has been no respite. And Faith No More is absolutely one of those bands. For 30 years, they have been in my top 5 to 10 artists. And yeah, there's something about them that's kind of very unique. And it's really hard to kind of put your finger on it. They didn't feel of the time or the place. And I don't mean that as they were before their time. There might be an argument for that, but it's almost felt like they were their own thing completely. Even though they were lumped in and, they talked about as the godfathers of new metal and this and that and funk metal and all the other labels associated. And there's truth to all them, but I always felt they were completely separate. And only Faith No More can sound like Faith No More. And maybe that's why they're kind of so special for me. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Thanks for listening to this. I think this is the longest video I've ever done, almost an hour. Thank you very much for listening.